Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the DevOps Summit presented by Venafi. My name is Nick Hunter, and I'm joined by Darren Harmer. I'm in technical marketing. Darren is a security expert and solutions architect, and he's going to do a fantastic demo for everyone. I'm glad everyone was able to join, and thank you again for your time today. Otherwise, with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So let me talk to you about Venafi and what we do. So when you think about keys and certificates and what Venafi does, keys and certificates typically are thought of as the keys and the foundations of identity on the internet. So we think about identities, we're thinking about authentication. And when you think about authentication, there's two different forms of systems and people that use authentication. And the two ways they do that typically are with passwords, biometrics, to authenticate and identify themselves. Then you have this third way of doing it, which is through keys and certificates. So when you think about keys and certificates, what uses and leverages keys and certificates for authentication? Those things are services, applications, cloud workloads, and more. And the number of these systems and applications and devices and users are exploding in number. These things use keys and certificates to authenticate themselves, and by doing that, a lot of this, the major authentication that's taking place is between different systems. So you're using certificates and keys to authenticate, communicate with each other, and encrypt that traffic. Gartner predicts that 50% of all network attacks are going to start leveraging encrypted traffic in 2017. And because of that, when you think about it in a DevOps environment where there's typically been very little security, because DevOps is been trained to in the past been always about speed and progress and creating things on the fly. Don't slow us down. Hasn't been a real need to apply security in the DevOps environment, and that's very much warranted, because if you start applying security controls, then DevOps slows down, business slows down, and your competitor gets ahead of you. What we're going to talk about today is not only can we apply security controls through keys and certificates into a DevOps environment, but we're going to do it so that we can show you that it's not going to slow you down. It'll actually add security and strength behind your DevOps environment without slowing you down one bit. Now, a little bit about Venafi. Venafi has invented the technology and orchestration that provides the security intelligence behind keys and certificates. So we're not just certificate management, and we're not just key management. Our goal is to protect all keys and certificates. We have over 270 of the largest, most advanced corporations that rely on the Venafi solution to secure and protect their digital keys and certificates. So we're thinking about security here. We're not just talking about certificates and management of those keys and certificates. The DevOps environments today leverage dynamic technologies to deliver new IT services faster than ever. And by doing that, their goal is to shorten the SLAs for internal IT. However, developers in the DevOps environment don't normally take the time to build security in. So what does that mean? In most DevOps environments, they're using self-signed certificates. They're installing SSH keys on systems and using those SSH keys to move fast. They're not thinking about using it for what they're originally created for, which is identity and authentication. They're using it to say, okay, I want to put my SSH key on this system. I need these two systems to communicate with each other. By putting those keys and putting those certificates, you're just making things go fast, but you're not actually applying security behind them. So now you have all these encrypted channels going and taking place. You have all this encrypted traffic, but it's really just to secure the channel. It's not actually to protect the environment, and you're not doing anything to protect those assets, which are keys and certificates. The vast majority of CIOs expect the speed of DevOps to make it difficult to know what should be trusted and what shouldn't be trusted. So now you're populating your environment. You've got self-signed certificates. You've got SSH keys everywhere. It's very hard to keep track of the chaos. So really now you're in a situation where you have all these keys and certificates. Things are encrypted. That's great. Do we actually Do we typically look at monitor traffic if it's encrypted? No, we pass that through. We don't monitor it. And then now you have all of this chaos because you've encrypted everything and you're very much blind to everything. So a couple of questions to ask yourself as we go through this today. Are your DevOps teams today skimping on security? Is it the typical situation where security second, speed is first? We have to meet our SLAs. We have to get these packages done fast and quickly. Is your DevOps team taking security shortcuts? And by that, you're not applying encryption, or you're setting up encryption just to set it up because you think, hey, encryption makes it secure, but you're not really protecting the assets behind that encryption. And so you're setting up for speed, but you're not setting up for actually what encryption is made to do, which is protect your environment and the confidentiality of your data. Think about how many keys and certificates that are out there being used by machine to machine. Not just user to log in, but how many times have you set up a system, you've put a key on, you put a certificate on, and now you have not just 100 users logging in that you need to authenticate, but now you've got all this system-to-system communication that's encrypted, and you've just set it, and you set it there to encrypt the traffic, but then again, you don't actually know who's using those keys and what's actually going on in the encrypted traffic. So think about what you're using SSH keys for and certificates for. Then think about your DevOps teams. We all know DevOps does not want to go slow. We don't want to slow down DevOps. That is what defines us and differentiates us between our competition. If we could build packages fast, quick, and agile, security usually is not applied there. And are they not using keys and certificates because it slows down the process? Are they only using self-sign so that they can just get by fast, and that's just been the practice? It's worked. Nobody said anything because you don't want to slow down that department. What if you are a security manager or a security architect, what if you could apply DevOps but not slow them down? Think about how important that would be and what kind of a win that would be as well. And lastly, can your security teams service new DevOps and fast IT environments with the current manual key and certificate processes? So you have things out there like Let's Encrypt. You have things like Lemur that make signing and obtaining certificates fast and easy, but all you're really doing is creating more chaos because you're just populating your environment with more keys and certificates that you can't manage and keep track of. And when I say manage and keep track of, management when I talk about that is not the issuance of keys and certificates. It's not the inventory of keys and certificates, but it's knowing what keys and certificates belong, which keys and certificates don't belong. So you're locking down systems, you're implementing security controls, you're reducing your overall security posture. These are all things that typically you don't think about with a DevOps environment, but with Venafi, we can provide a platform that can do all of that for you, give you that security intelligence, give you that orchestration without slowing down DevOps. So a couple more thoughts. Is your DevOps team having to choose between agility and security when delivering fast IT services? So what if I could tell you that you could automate the procurement and installation of cryptographic keys and digital certificates with the promise that it's not going to slow down fast IT, and now you're actually going to be able to implement security controls? With Venafi, we can dramatically reduce the chaos that's involved with managing and securing those keys and certificates. The Venafi API integrates with any DevOps and platform such as Chef, Puppet, and Docker, and the automation reduces the time needed to procure and provision certificates from days to minutes. So now you've got this process set up. DevOps isn't going to have to do anything different. They're going to be able to get their certificates fast, quickly, and everything. But now, as you issue those certificates, now as you issue those SSH keys, there are security controls in place. So you're able to visualize everything that's going on in the background, and you're able to maintain your risk posture without slowing down fast IT. So with that, I'm going to hand off to our security expert and security architect, Darren Harmer. He's going to take you through a demo in a few more slides, and we'll get into a really cool demo where he'll show you how Venafi can work with the different packaging systems that are out there in cloud infrastructures. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Darren.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate you introducing the topic so eloquently. And for everyone who's joined, thank you for taking the time as well. We appreciate you taking a slice out of your day to either listen live or to listen to the recording after the fact. As Nick said, I'm going to take you through a few slides which hopefully will cover off how we fit into the process, the benefits we bring, and the challenges that companies face, both from a DevOps perspective of obviously wanting things fast, which is what Nick's been talking about, but also the problems facing the security group, and they've got processes to adhere to as well. So we're trying to show how we can hopefully bridge that gap and allow both teams to get what they need without reaching conflict or making decisions that lowers the security of an organization or of their employer. So there's a few slides that we need to jump through, which as I mentioned. The first one is simply talking about how the process looks. So it doesn't really matter what kind of tooling you're using. And we've already discussed, there are lots of tools on the market like Chef, Puppet. There are many, many more. But no matter what you do, you should be stepping through a process that looks something like this. Not overly complicated, but you simply want to get machines built as quickly as possible from a fast IT perspective. The problem we face is that you kind of go all the way through the process of building machines, getting configurations built, and getting kind of 99% of the way of having your platform spun up in seconds or minutes. And then you have to request crypto assets, keys and certificates, as we've already mentioned. And the problem is that process itself can take a long time. Venafi's had customers previously who've been managing tens of thousands of certificates. And they've been delighted when they've got their time to deliver a new certificate down from 2 weeks in one case down to a day, which is obviously a significant improvement. But a day is still too slow if you're talking about delivering, getting certificates down onto machines that are being spun up in minutes to deal with kind of increasing capacity or just replacing a kind of kit that's already out there in the place, in the environment. Obviously, it's also more of a manual process, installing certificates as well. And that also kind of doesn't go along with what we're trying to achieve from a fast IT perspective. And so although the business and the security guys and the crypto guys have processes they need to adapt to or adhere to, they also need to adapt. And hopefully we can talk about ways in which that can be achieved. Because obviously the one thing we don't want to do is stop the deployment at any point while we're waiting for a manual process to kick in. And so what we see, and this is just focusing on part of the slides you saw on the last one, is you have a number of options which are valid. They're options, I suppose, is just a better way of looking at it rather than saying they're valid. And if you're trying to get systems spun up very quickly, you can either go through the process and request your certificate from security, as I've already mentioned, but that's going to slow you down. And that is not always an acceptable answer to the problem. Obviously, you don't want everything to come to a halt. You don't want to have to manually install the certificate. But the flip side is obviously generate a certificate yourself. So create a self-signed certificate, which will allow you to continue in your process and reach your endpoint and deliver whatever service it is you're looking to do. The downside of that is the DevOps teams, while trying to solve their problem of getting what they want fast, create another problem, which is they've created a certificate that the organization has no visibility of. We obviously don't know that it's there. Therefore, we can't manage it. Also, as they're doing it themselves, they're not necessarily adhering to corporate policy. And corporate policy may be good security best practice, like how long a certificate should last for, or a strength of the key. So there are lots of valid reasons why we don't want people just creating keys and certificates on the fly. But there's also a valid reason within DevOps for wanting something very quick. So what we have to come up with is effectively a middle way between the two of getting organizations getting what they need. Now, Nick's already touched upon this. He's already talked about how CIOs are not expecting one of the benefits that is derived from DevOps being an increase in what is trusted and what is not. And it kind of makes sense. If you look at the two camps, for want of a better phrase, and what they're trying to achieve, there does seem to be a clash between the two. And I think that's part of the reason leading into the kind of statistics like this. Now, what we're trying to do from a Venafi standpoint is, as Nick's already touched upon, Venafi has hundreds of large organizations using the trust protection platform around the world. Now, what we do here is we apply best practice policy, we act as a registration authority, and we allow the traditional IT groups to manage their keys and certificates in a logical way. And this is done through user portals where people can interact, they can see where their crypto assets are, and they can manage them. But what we can also do is, rather than having a web GUI which people go into to manage their keys and certificates, we can give them a route in direct through our REST API. Now, at no point does this change the control that security has over those certificates that are being issued. Although they're being issued very quickly, and the DevOps teams can get access to them in seconds or minutes, it doesn't mean that those certificates are any weaker than certificates issued by the rest of the business. And it doesn't mean that process and workflow isn't adhered to as well. Again, just because something's going in through the API doesn't make it of lesser quality than a certificate issued in a traditional way. So that's something that Venafi can help with. And we have a couple of examples, and they're anonymized, but I can talk to them in a little detail here. The first is we work with a very large global bank, and you can read the case study yourself here. But what they were trying to do is, they have a traditional IT team, as you'd expect, with tens of thousands of certificates, and they have a lot of process in place to manage them. But they're also looking to offer certificates to a cloud group who are looking to spin up machines very quickly, and therefore need a slightly different process for getting their certificates. And this is something they did, and again, they're already a Venafi customer, but simply by using the REST API that's part of the product as standard. Now, as well as providing the certificates to that group very quickly, and therefore meeting their requirements, they could also make sure those certificates were secure enough and that they met corporate policy. But one thing that we also allowed them to do was we could put additional checks and balances in place with these certificates because they weren't going through a manual kind of workflow approval. And so we did that. And we did that by giving them a lot of logging so that they could have a compensated control. They know exactly what they'd issued even though they weren't manually approving it. And we could also restrict down the domains that we were issuing certificates for. And lastly, we also managed to reduce the length of time the certificate was valid for. So if any certificates were issued incorrectly, they didn't have the usual 2-year valid period, they were going to expire after 4 months. And so DevOps can actually pull through some really good security benefits as well, which is having certificates that don't last as long. And because they're easy to request and easy to replace, there's less of a problem of having a certificate that expires sooner than the rest of the kind of organization's policy. The next example is a gaming company. And what we have here is we have an organization that has a couple of challenges. They want to refresh most of their environment every week or so. So they're basically talking about ripping down and replacing. And so they needed an automated way of doing that. So this organization doesn't effectively have any traditional IT. It's all DevOps. It's all very fast. And gaming companies have other problems as well. And when you get to talk to them and learn what their challenges are, they can be quite interesting. So it was news to me, but apparently most people gamble and game on Thursday, Friday nights. So they have to put up an awful lot of technology to deal with the peaks and troughs, and which, again, DevOps allows them to do, and Venafi allows them to get the crypto assets in place. And so that's quite a different example from the previous one, but a very good example also. Apologies, I'm just trying to... Now, we have some technology examples as well. And Nick's already touched on the fact that we can work with Chef, Puppet, and a lot of different technology areas. Now, I'm not expecting to be able to read this slide on the screen. It's not there so you can read every word that's on the slide. It's here just as an example of something that we helped a third-party systems integrator develop on behalf of one of their customers, where they wanted to automate the deployment of certificates onto data power machines. And so they built that in Urban Code, which is a tool set from IBM. We've also had a lot of work. Obviously, Urban Code is mentioned on this slide as well. But there are other tool sets as well, which you can see here, such as Jenkins and Spinnaker, which again is something that we've done a lot of work with trying to integrate with, so that when customers and people who want to use Venafi to issue keys and certificates come to us, and they want to use us for a DevOps deployment methodology, hopefully we already have the playbooks, the recipes, and the plugins for all these automation tools that the companies need. And this is something we've worked very hard on in the last year, 18 months, and it's a focus for Venafi moving forward over the next couple of years also. The same is true, and specifically for Chef. I think Chef is probably the tool set we've encountered the most over the last 12 to 18 months. It was probably one of the first to get truly embedded into global Fortune 5000 companies. And so it was one of the first ones that we had requests made of us. So we've issued a cookbook, and we can help customers go through all the different elements you need to regarding certificates, and they include, requesting, checking, retrieving, and also revoking certificates as well. So you can say when it's no longer being used and it's no longer valid. Lastly, a newer technology, which we have seen in large financial organizations, I suppose, over the last couple of years, but that has gained even more traction recently, is Docker. And it's the ability that as people are spinning up and spinning down Docker containers, what we can do is when they start, we can inject keys and certificates straight into them so they can get up and working straight away and establish communications with other containers. But also when we spin them down, we can automatically revoke those certificates. Again, so there's organizations automating more and more and looking at micro-virtualization and all kinds of other technologies that are out there. This is something that Venafi is keeping pace with and trying to bring a solution to bear which you can utilize very easily so that you can get the benefits of these different technologies. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go over and do a very short demonstration of making some very simple API calls. So we're not trying to do anything too impressive or complicated. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen in a moment, and we'll be showing you an application called Postman, which is not a Venafi application. It's an application that you can all download freely if you want to have a look at it and play with it. And it should allow you to interact with an API and test some functions, and also share what you've created with other people, and basically just create a good example of how simple some of these elements can be to use and create. So what I need to do is I need to now stop the presentation and switch over, which I'll do in a second, and then we'll take you through a couple of very quick examples. Those examples would be I'll simply authenticate to Venafi, and I'll show you exactly what the Venafi console, or one of the Venafi consoles, looks like, and then we'll show you how easy it is to fire in a request to create a certificate. Now, hopefully, you should be able to see my screen in a moment. And if one of my colleagues could pass it over to the bit where I can share my screen, that would be really helpful. Thank you. And so what I wanted to take you through, and hopefully what you'll be able to see on the screen, is we have a number of different screens you'll be taken through in a moment. The one we're on at the moment is simply, it sounds remarkably uninteresting, I concede, is the documentation for the Venafi API, which will hopefully give anyone who wants to start looking at how Venafi works all the information they need about the different calls they can make and the type of information they need to provide and what will be sent back. I'm not planning to focus in on that, but it's important to know that it's there. We also have Trust Protection Platform, which is the solution that is used by a lot of companies in the Global 5,000, a good few hundred of them. And what we can see here is that we have a series of folders on the left-hand side, and in there a series of certificates which have already been issued. And of course, everything that's fired in via the API can be seen via the main Venafi interface as well, and therefore managed by the security group as well. The other element which we're going to talk about is a tool called Postman, as I've already mentioned. Now, what this allows you to do is basically send in requests to the Venafi API and then get back the information you need. And as I said, I'm not going to focus on this too much. We've already, I think, talked through a lot of what we're trying to achieve. And we're just trying to give you a taster, a little bit of knowledge about what can be done with Venafi for both security and DevOps. So you get an idea, you get enough information so you can come back to us and ask us more questions if it's relevant. So simply, all we're trying to do here is we're sending a post command. This is the path we're sending it to, which is our Venafi server. We've got an authorize tag on the end there. And we're simply sending through our username and our password in this case. And what we're doing is we're authenticating and getting an API key, which is validation that we're allowed to speak to Venafi and then start getting crypto assets. Of course, all the security can be set up by the security group to make sure that only the right people and the right groups have certain permissions. Now, once we've done that, we can then go through and perform several different functions. So if we want to get a certificate, for example, or create a certificate, I should say, we can go through and we can add in, the name of whatever certificate we want to create. In this case, we'll go for Postman example. Obviously, it would help if I could type correctly. And then what we can do is we're simply defining here, we're going to a different part of the API, but we're defining where we want the certificate to be created, in this case, in policy certificates. And we're also giving the certificate a name, in this case, Postman example. And if we send that in as well, what we'll do is we can see the response we get back is the fact that certificate has been created. And we can go through or go back to Venafi, the main kind of GUI, go in certificates, and we'll find that we've got a new certificate that's been created called Postman example. And also we'll validate the fact that was created by the Web SDK, and we'll then start going through a process of auditing and creating logs for each step as it goes through the process. So that's a very, very short and quick demo. I appreciate we're running out of time of what we can do, but of course you can also retrieve certificates, get them back in whatever format you want. And the API can be a strong and powerful tool, not only for requesting keys and certificates, but also we're doing more and more integrations with process tools, CMDBs, so configuration management databases, and generally working with more and more corporate enterprise class solutions to make sure that we are part of the ecosystem of an environment. So what I'll do with that is I will pass back to Nick and let him just finish off the session. Thank you.
Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll open this up for questions. If you could possibly go into chat if you do have a question and ask it there. And then as we get the questions, we'll ask them aloud so everybody can hear them, and then we'll go through and answer them as you need it. So a question came in, Darren. What are some of the use cases that you've implemented the security solution for TPP?
So I think as we were saying, as we went through, we work with a lot of large banks. So a common use case seems to be that they're setting up internal kind of cloud offerings. So not using public cloud, but still the ability to spin machines up very fast. And again, it's those kind of teams who want to get their access to certificates very quickly. I thought the gaming example was very strong as well because, if you take into account when sporting events that people want to gamble on are being run and when people have most free time, that's when they need to spin up a lot more technology. And they need to spin it up fast and they need to be able to tear it down quickly as well because it has associated costs. And one thing that companies like that need to do is, the one thing they don't want is they don't want to be unavailable when their customers want to use them because that's how they make money. And they all make money through being available as a website as well. So it's important for them that they get this kind of process correct and they get it correct quickly as well. So that would be the two classic examples that stick in my mind at least.
So another question: what kind of API does the trust protection platform use?
It has a RESTful API. It's not SOAP or anything like that. RESTful, and again, we have developers guides and documentation, as well as examples for most of the large technology sets that we can make available to anyone who's interested. We also try and enable our customers as much as possible on how to use the API, and on a regular basis, we normally run workshops with customers that are interested, using Postman examples because we can share the collections to get them more familiar with how the API works. So that would be, hopefully that answers the question.
So one more question that just came in. If you were to implement the trust protection platform into a DevOps environment, what type of impacts do DevOps users and customers of DevOps typically see?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think one thing that we see over and over again is that DevOps teams are going to get a certificate, one way or the other. It's going to happen because they need them. They need them in order to be able to do their job. So what we found is by using Venafi, Trust Protection Platform, we can allow and make it so easy for them to get a certificate that as well as the security guys liking the fact that we've been implemented because we can make sure things are done properly, the DevOps guys like us as well because we're removing a problem, we're removing a barrier. They know they're not going around a process, so again, they're adhering to their own company policies, which they should, of course, be doing. But it's fast, and it's quick, and it's easy to use. So we normally find that DevOps teams, once we start speaking to them, because, of course, Venafi has been around a long time, been managing certificates for a long time, and a lot of our relationships have been with the traditional security group. Once we start interacting with the DevOps teams, we find that they normally drive forward the Venafi implementation as well as helping themselves, helping security as well, and improving the security posture of the business.
I think we have time for one more question, and I'm going to pick one of these. Here's a good one. Is it possible to implement change control or workflow? We are an ITIL shop is part of the solution.
Yeah, so this is something we encounter all the time. So Venafi has an awful lot of ITIL trained staff as well, and we focus in on change, release, and config as a kind of our main area of interaction with that framework. Now, the simple way of looking at it is there's a lot of tools on the market which are designed to be service desks and act as CMDBs and contain configuration items. Now, that is not what Venafi does, but we do interact nicely with those tool sets. We've done a lot of work previously with tools such as ServiceNow and Remedy about making sure that when you're trying to issue a change request to replace a certificate, the change request has all the relevant information. And the Venafi, if we're doing an automated deployment, isn't deploying a certificate unless it's in a change window. So although they're two separate subjects, they do most definitely have points where they connect. And again, that's something we're used to dealing with, both within the engineering teams and also our professional services teams as well. So yes, is a simple answer to that.
Just to add my own commentary on that one, or let me follow up with a question to you, Darren. Is it within the product itself? Could you talk about the workflow and the automation? I think those were two things also that I see commonly in some of these other questions, real quickly.
Okay, so within Venafi, we have the ability to attach workflow to any part of the organization, any part of the folder structure where we inserted that certificate earlier. And what we can do there is, and a classic piece of workflow, is that if you're requesting a certificate from an external CA, a chargeable item, we will put in the workflow to have an authorization from a manager. That's quite common. Whereas if you're requesting a certificate from an internal CA, maybe you wouldn't go through that same process. So workflow can be attached to any certificate, any group of certificates within Venafi. It can also be attached to requests coming in via the API, although that's less common. So that's one important area of Venafi. Does that answer your question, Nick?
In relation to DevOps, we could actually implement change control or workflow so that before a certificate is issued, it could go through some type of approval process, correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's completely up to the organization in question. One of the challenges I think a lot of organizations have is they want to have authorizations and workflows in place for certificates, but the whole art of spinning up machines very quickly doesn't necessarily coincide well with a manual process. So this is what I was referring to earlier with the banking example, where they've used Venafi and knowledge we have to implement compensating controls. So they have a manual approval process for all their certificates, apart from ones that are issued to the cloud team because they need them fast. And so what they do instead is logging is important to them. Obviously reviewing those, be that manually or automatically via a log and SIM tool that we can integrate with, and making sure that certificate validation periods are shorter and that they're only issued for the correct groups or the correct domains.
Thank you. I think that's we have a number of questions, but I think you just actually in that one answer summed them all up. So thank you, Darren. So with that, I think we can go ahead and wrap up for today. Thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions following this, certainly reach out to. You could visit the Venafi website, venafi.com. We'll be happy to assist you with anything, any of your needs, any questions that you have. And with that, I will wrap up the meeting. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Enjoy your weekend as it comes along in a day or so. All right? Thanks, guys.